Ethan had always trusted Olivia. After 5 years of marriage, their relationship had fallen into a quiet rhythm, comfortable, predictable. He told himself that was normal, that the spark fading was just part of being together for so long. But lately, things felt different. It started with small things. Olivia began staying late at work more often, claiming deadlines and last-minute meetings. Her phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now always in her hand or tucked into her bag. When he asked about her day, her answers were shorter, less detailed. Ethan wanted to believe her. He really did, but the whispers of doubt had begun to creep in. Then he found the receipt. It was a crumpled piece of paper left on the passenger seat of Olivia's car. Ethan hadn't meant to snoop. He'd just borrowed her car to run to the store after his had a dead battery. As he slid into the driver's seat, the receipt caught his eye. A charge from a hotel downtown. 2 guests. His heart hammered in his chest. Maybe there was an explanation. A work event, perhaps? He shoved the receipt into his pocket and tried to push the thought aside, but it gnawed at him all day. He couldn't focus at work. Every email he typed, every phone call he answered, felt like static buzzing in his ears. He kept pulling the receipt out, staring at it, trying to find some hidden meaning in the printed text. That night, as Olivia stood at the sink washing dishes, Ethan watched her carefully. The weight of the receipt in his pocket felt heavier than it should. "Hey," he said, trying to sound casual. "I borrowed your car earlier. Found something interesting." She glanced over her shoulder. "Oh." He pulled the receipt from his pocket and held it up. "Care to explain this?" Her eyes widened, and for a split second, he saw something flash across her face. Fear. Guilt. She quickly masked it with a shaky laugh. "Oh, that? It's not what you think. A friend from work needed a place to crash after a conference. I was just helping out." Ethan nodded slowly, tucking the receipt back into his pocket. "Right, just helping out." She dried her hands and turned to face him, her brow furrowed. "You don't believe me, do you?" He shrugged. "I want to, but it's hard when you've been acting so different lately." Olivia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Ethan, I swear, it was nothing. You're overthinking this." Maybe she was right. Maybe he was being paranoid. But the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave him. That night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling while Olivia slept soundly beside him. His mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. The next day, Ethan found himself searching for more clues. He checked the bank statements, looking for any unusual transactions. There was another charge from the same hotel 2 weeks ago. His stomach twisted into knots. If she had lied about the first time, what else was she hiding? Ethan decided he needed proof. That evening, he set up a small camera in the living room, hidden behind a potted plant. He felt sick to his stomach doing it, but he had to know the truth. He needed answers, and he would get them. The next morning, Ethan woke up before Olivia. He lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to her soft breathing. His heart ached. Was he overreacting? Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe the hotel receipt really was innocent. But then he remembered the second charge he found in the bank statements, and the doubt came flooding back. As Olivia stirred awake, Ethan forced a smile. "Morning," he said softly. She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. They exchanged a few words about their plans for the day before Olivia rushed off to work. Ethan watched her go, his mind racing. Once she was gone, he sat down at the computer and pulled up the footage from the camera he'd hidden the night before. He fast-forwarded through hours of silence until he saw Olivia come home. She dropped her bag on the couch and immediately pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, typing out messages. Ethan strained to see the screen, but the angle was wrong. Then, something odd happened. Olivia looked around the room, almost as if she was making sure no one was watching. She sat down, took a deep breath, and called someone. Ethan turned up the volume. "Hey, yeah, I just got home." Olivia's voice came through the speakers. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. I told him it was a work thing. He believed me." Ethan's heart dropped. His hands clenched into fists as he heard Olivia's soft laughter, the playful tone in her voice. "No, I miss you too. It's been hard sneaking around like this. I wish we could just be together without all the lies." The call ended shortly after that, but the damage was done. Ethan sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. She was lying, she was hiding something, and he was going to find out exactly what. That night, Ethan didn't say much. Olivia acted like everything was fine, making small talk over dinner and laughing at her favorite show on TV. Ethan played along, but inside he was seething. He needed a plan. The next day, he decided to follow her. Olivia left for work at her usual time, but instead of heading to the office, she drove across town to a quiet little cafe. Ethan parked a few spaces down and watched from his car. She ordered a coffee, found a table in the corner, and checked her phone. Minutes later, a man slid into the seat across from her. Tall, dark-haired, with an easy smile. Olivia lit up when she saw him, her face glowing with excitement. Ethan's stomach twisted. He watched as they leaned in close, their hands brushing across the table. After about an hour, they left the cafe together, walking down the street side by side. Ethan followed from a distance, his heart pounding in his chest. They stopped at a park, sitting on a bench under a tree. Olivia rested her head on the man's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her. Ethan's vision blurred with rage. He took out his phone and snapped a few pictures. He wasn't sure what he was going to do with them yet, but he knew one thing for certain: he deserved the truth, and he was going to get it. Ethan barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Olivia leaning into that man, their hands brushing, her head resting on his shoulder. The images burned into his mind like a cruel nightmare that wouldn't end. When dawn broke, he felt no relief, only a deeper sense of dread. The next morning, Olivia hummed softly while making coffee, as if nothing had changed. Ethan sat silently at the kitchen table, watching her. How could she pretend everything was normal? How long had she been lying to him? "You okay?" Olivia asked, glancing at him over her shoulder. Ethan forced a tight smile. "Just tired. Didn't sleep well." She frowned, setting a mug in front of him. "Work stress again?" "Something like that," he muttered, gripping the mug tightly. All day at work, he struggled to focus. The pictures he'd taken at the park weighed heavy in his pocket. He wanted to confront her, to throw the evidence in her face and demand the truth. But part of him hesitated. He needed more. Something concrete. He wasn't going to give her the chance to weasel out of this. That evening, Ethan left work early and parked down the street from their house. Olivia wouldn't be home for another hour. He slipped inside and went straight to her laptop. She always used the same password, their anniversary. His hands trembled as he typed it in. Her inbox was filled with the usual clutter: work emails, newsletters, appointment reminders, but then he found a folder titled Personal. Inside were emails to someone named Ryan. Ethan's heart pounded as he clicked the most recent message. "Ryan, I can't stop thinking about last night. Every time we're together, I feel alive again. I wish things were simpler. I hate sneaking around, but I don't know what else to do. Ethan deserves better than this, but I can't walk away from you. Not yet." Oh. His vision blurred with rage. There it was. Proof. No more excuses. No more doubt. The sound of Olivia's car pulling into the driveway jolted him out of his trance. He closed the laptop and slipped back into his usual seat at the kitchen table. His heart raced, but his face remained calm. When the front door opened, he felt eerily composed. "Hey!" Olivia called, setting her purse on the counter. "You're home early. Everything okay?" Ethan folded his hands on the table. "We need to talk." She hesitated, sensing the shift in his tone. Okay. What about? He slid his phone across the table, the pictures of her and Ryan glowing on the screen. Olivia's face paled. Ethan, I can explain. Don't! He cut her off, his voice low and steady. I saw the emails. I know everything. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes as she sank into the chair across from him. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. But you did. He stood, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. I deserve better than this. She reached out, grabbing his wrist. Ethan, please. I was confused. I never wanted to fall for him. It just happened. He pulled his arm free. You had a choice. You made it. Olivia's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. Ethan watched her cry, feeling nothing. The woman he thought he knew had shattered his trust, his love. What was left between them now? Without another word, he grabbed his keys and walked out the door. As he drove away, he felt strangely numb. The life he thought he had was gone, but at least now, he knew the truth. That night, Ethan checked into a hotel. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, replaying every moment over the past few months. Every late-night work excuse, every hushed phone call, every time Olivia smiled at her screen when she thought he wasn't looking. The next morning, he called a lawyer. There was no going back. Ethan stared at the papers in front of him. The lawyer's office felt colder than it should, the hum of the air conditioner buzzing faintly in the background. Each document he signed felt like a nail in the coffin of the life he thought he had. The pen scratched against the paper, his signature sealing the end of 5 years of marriage. When he finally left, the afternoon sun felt blinding. He stood on the sidewalk, taking in a shaky breath. The weight of the past few days pressed down on him, but there was also a strange sense of relief. He was free, or at least, he would be soon. That evening, Ethan returned to the house one last time. Olivia wasn't home. Good. He didn't want another confrontation. He moved through the rooms, collecting the last of his things. Each item felt like a memory. The framed photo from their honeymoon, the coffee mugs they bought at that little seaside shop, the blanket they used to cuddle under during movie nights. He left most of it behind. In the bedroom, he found one final piece of evidence, a small silver necklace tucked away in her jewelry box. He didn't recognize it. Attached was a tiny heart pendant engraved with the name Ryan. Ethan clenched his jaw. Even now, she couldn't hide her betrayal. He placed the necklace on the nightstand, a silent message for her to find. No notes, no confrontation. Just that. As he loaded the last box into his car, he glanced back at the house. It felt empty now, like a shell of what it once was. He slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and drove away without looking back. The first few days in his new apartment were quiet. Too quiet. The silence felt heavier than he expected. The walls felt bare, the air too still. He threw himself into work, trying to drown out the thoughts that kept creeping into his mind. Was it his fault? Had he been too distant? Too focused on his career? He replayed every moment, searching for the cracks that led to their collapse. One evening, he wandered down to a nearby bar, needing to get out of his own head. The place was dimly lit, quiet enough that the low hum of conversation blended into the background. He nursed a drink, staring blankly at the ice swirling in his glass. Rough night? The bartender's voice broke through his thoughts. Ethan forced a tight smile. Rough year? The bartender chuckled, pouring him another drink. Well, here's to better days ahead. He raised his glass, but the bitterness lingered. He watched the city lights flicker through the bar window, wondering if this emptiness would ever fade. A few days later, his phone buzzed. Olivia. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He almost ignored it but found himself answering. Ethan. Her voice was soft, almost broken. "What do you want, Olivia?" His voice was cold. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I made a mistake." Ethan closed his eyes, taking a slow breath. "You made more than one. I know. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I miss you." He laughed bitterly. "You don't miss me. You miss the comfort, the safety, but you threw that away." "Ethan, please." "Goodbye, Olivia." He ended the call and set the phone down. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. The past was behind him. The future was his. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of birds chirping outside his window. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft patterns across the room. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the weight of heartbreak pressing down on him. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stood on his balcony, watching the city stir to life below. The air felt fresher, the world brighter. He took a slow sip, savoring the warmth. That day, he walked into work with a clear mind. He threw himself into new projects, stayed late to brainstorm ideas, and even grabbed drinks with coworkers after hours. Bit by bit, he was reclaiming his life. One afternoon, he found himself at the park, the same park where he had seen Olivia and Ryan together. He sat on a bench, watching families laugh and couples stroll hand in hand. He felt no anger, no pain, just quiet acceptance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood, stretched, and made his way home. Each step felt lighter than the last. He was finally free. Ethan settled into his new life, slowly but surely. The quiet of his apartment no longer felt suffocating. It became a sanctuary. Each morning, he woke early, savoring the silence as he sipped his coffee and watched the sun rise over the city skyline. Work kept him busy, but more than that, it gave him purpose. Every project he took on felt like a step forward, a way to reclaim the control he had lost. Weeks turned into months. The ache in his chest dulled, replaced by a quiet determination. Ethan started going to the gym again, rediscovering the strength he once took pride in. He even picked up his old guitar, fingers stumbling over the strings at first, but soon finding the rhythm that had once been second nature. The music filled the empty apartment, turning the silence into something comforting rather than oppressive. One Friday night, after a long week, Ethan found himself at his favorite bar. He sat in the corner, nursing a whiskey and watching the crowd. The laughter and music felt distant, like white noise in the background. He didn't mind. It was enough to just exist in the space, quietly observing. "Mind if I join you?" a soft voice asked. Ethan looked up to find a woman standing by his table, a gentle smile on her lips. She had dark eyes that seemed to see right through him, and there was a quiet confidence in the way she held herself. "Sure," he said, gesturing to the empty seat. They talked for hours. Her name was Claire. She worked in marketing, loved hiking, and had a wicked sense of humor that caught him off guard more than once. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan laughed. Not the forced, polite laugh he had mastered over the past months, but a real, genuine laugh that made his chest feel lighter. As the night wore on, Claire leaned forward, her eyes searching his face. "You seem like someone who's been through a lot," she said quietly. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I have." She smiled softly. "Well, for what it's worth, you're still standing. That says something." They exchanged numbers before parting ways. As Ethan walked home through the cool night air, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. The next evening, as he strummed quietly on his balcony, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Olivia. He debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of him. He answered. "Ethan?" Her voice was soft, hesitant. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I just needed to talk. Olivia, he said evenly, leaning back in his chair. What do you want? She sighed, the sound heavy with regret. I needed to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed you to hear it. Ethan closed his eyes, letting her words hang in the air. Why now? Because I ruined the best thing I ever had, and I live with that regret every single day. Ryan, he wasn't who I thought he was. It fell apart after you left. I made a mistake. Ethan chuckled softly, shaking his head. Yeah, you did. I don't expect anything from you, Olivia continued. I needed you to know that losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me. He was quiet for a long moment. I appreciate you saying that, but we're done, Olivia. There's no going back. I know, she whispered. I just hope you find happiness. You deserve it. As the call ended, Ethan set his phone down and stared out at the city lights. He felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a quiet sense of closure. The next morning, Ethan woke with a newfound lightness. He grabbed his coffee and stepped onto his balcony, breathing in the crisp morning air. The past was behind him. The future stretched out before him, bright and full of possibility. Later that day, he texted Claire, Ethan, hey, want to grab coffee sometime? Her reply came almost instantly. Claire, I'd love that. Ethan smiled. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. He was finally free. The coffee shop was quiet, the soft hum of conversation and the whir of the espresso machine filling the space. Ethan sat by the window, watching the world pass by outside. His fingers drummed lightly on the table, nerves prickling beneath his skin. It had been a long time since he felt this way. Anticipation, excitement, and maybe a little fear. The bell above the door chimed, and when he looked up, there she was. Claire. She spotted him instantly, her face breaking into a warm smile as she made her way over. She looked effortlessly beautiful, her dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, and a simple scarf wrapped around her neck. Hey, she said softly, sliding into the seat across from him. Hope I didn't keep you waiting. Not at all, Ethan replied, feeling his nerves settle just a bit. I was early. They ordered their drinks, and soon they fell into conversation. Claire had a way of making him feel at ease. She laughed easily, her eyes lighting up when she talked about her adventures hiking through the mountains or the time she got lost in a foreign city and ended up at a local family's dinner table. Ethan found himself opening up more than he expected. He told her about his work, his love for music, and eventually, he told her about Olivia. The words came easier than he thought they would. It felt different this time, less like reopening a wound and more like letting it heal. Claire listened quietly, her expression soft with understanding. I'm sorry you went through that, she said when he finished. No one deserves to be treated that way. Ethan shrugged. It was hard, but I'm learning to move on. I guess it taught me a lot about myself. She smiled. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. They talked for hours, the coffee shop growing quieter as the evening wore on. The staff began wiping down tables and turning chairs upside down, signaling closing time, but neither of them seemed to notice. Time slipped away as they shared stories and laughter, finding comfort in each other's company. When they finally stepped outside, the city lights twinkled against the dark sky. The air was crisp, and their breath misted in the cold. Ethan walked her to her car, hands tucked into his pockets, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through him, just being near her. Claire hesitated before opening her car door. I had a really nice time tonight. Me too, Ethan said, smiling softly. She bit her lip, looking at him for a moment before stepping closer. Maybe we could do this again sometime? He nodded. I'd like that. She hesitated for a moment, then leaned in, pressing a soft kiss against his cheek. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Claire. As Claire drove away, Ethan stood on the sidewalk, watching her taillights disappear into the night. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. He took a deep breath, savoring the cold air and the quiet hum of the city around him. The weight he had been carrying for months felt a little lighter. That night, as he lay in bed, he realized something. The constant ache he had carried for so long had eased. He no longer felt like a man trying to outrun his past. He felt like a man ready to embrace his future. And for the first time, he slept peacefully. In the days that followed, Ethan and Claire continued to see each other. Coffee dates turned into long walks, which turned into dinners that stretched late into the night. They talked about everything: hopes, fears, regrets. Claire never pushed him to talk about Olivia, but when he did, she listened without judgment. Slowly, he felt himself opening up in ways he hadn't thought possible. One weekend, they took a drive out to the countryside. Claire had mentioned a hiking trail she loved, and Ethan found himself agreeing before he even realized what he was saying. The trail wound through tall trees, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. They walked in comfortable silence, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves beneath their boots and the distant chirping of birds. At the top of the trail, they sat on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley below. Claire leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest, different from anything he'd felt before. This wasn't the desperate need to fill a void. This was peace. You know, Claire said softly, I think you're stronger than you realize. Ethan looked down at her, smiling. I think I'm starting to believe that. They sat there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt whole.